Good morning, students. Welcome to today's class of English. Lucy Calkins has once said, "Meanings come not from events themselves, but from what we bring to them." Dear students, this quote relates somehow to today's chapter, which we are going to study. That is the third chapter of your main course book, that is The Man in the Train. Here we will know that how one of the main characters of this story has misinterpreted the things and taken the things wrongly about the story, about the incidents, about the events, and at the end she realized that how wrong she was. This is a kind of detective story, you could say. Let us see what has happened in this story. Before that, I think most of you are interested in the detective stories. You might have read Little Red Riding Hood. This is a very famous story, and some of you are fans of the stories of Sherlock Holmes. If you are not, then you should go ahead the books of these authors. I'm sure that you will be liking them, because these detective stories are the thriller stories, and these are always very interesting. So you should go ahead for this kind of books. Let us see about this story. We should know first about this story. Let us see what the author says here. Whenever we read about a crime in the newspaper or watch a suspense movie, our thoughts and emotions get disturbed. But what we see in the movie is all make-believe and not real. And sometimes what we have read in the newspaper turns out to be false. When this realization dawns upon us, we feel relieved and our minds are free from tension once again. Read the story to see how unfounded fear and suspicion can prey upon a person's mind. Sometimes you might have noticed that when we see something in TV, or we read a story that is a thriller story or somehow horror, so that put a lot of impact on our mind. And before sleeping, if we read or see them, we feel that we'll dream about them. Or the whole day, if we are reading them in the morning, then the whole day the things are there in our mind, and we get disturbed sometimes, and we want to know the solution of that. We want to finish it. If we are reading a thriller story, we want to finish the story and want to know the end of that. And sometimes when we are fearful after reading something, we realize later on that our fear was useless. There was nothing like that. But this is a human tendency that we used to think on some of the events for a longer period, and we get disturbed for a longer time. Let us see the story. Mrs. Blake saw him first on the platform at Victoria Station. A tall, heavy man with dark hair, carrying a case and a light overcoat over his arm. "Do you know that man?" she asked her husband, who was seeing her off at the station for a day's visit to some cousins in Eastbourne. "I'm sure I've seen him somewhere before." Mr. Black shook his head. "I've never seen him in my life," he said. "Now, have you got everything you wanted? A newspaper?" "No, thanks. I have read the paper this morning. But please get me a magazine and some water." Mr. Blake bought his wife's ticket at the booking office and then found her a seat in an empty first-class carriage. "I'm sorry, I can't stay until the train goes," he said. "I have to leave for the office now." Mrs. Blake waved goodbye to her husband and then sat down in a corner to read the magazine. Then she Then, just as the train was going to start, a tall, dark man got in. He put his overcoat and case on the luggage rack above his head and sat down in the seat facing her. As soon as the train started, he took out a newspaper and began to read. Mrs. Blake looked at him. She was sure she knew him. Then suddenly she remembered in the newspaper that morning some picture on the front page, and among them the picture of a man whom the police were looking for. The man the police said was a killer. Now the man was sitting there with her in an empty compartment of a train traveling at 60 miles an hour, a train that did not stop for over an hour until it got to Eastbourne. Mrs. Blake was frightened, very frightened. What ought she to do? Pull the alarm cord over her head and stop the train? But what shall I say to the guard when he comes? She asked herself. I can't be sure this is the man. If it is the man in the picture, what will he do if I get up to pull the cord? The man was still reading the newspaper, and Mrs. Blake went on watching him over her magazine. If only I had that newspaper John wanted to buy me, she thought, I could have looked at the picture again and be sure. After some time, the man put down the paper and looked out of the window. As she watched him, Mrs. Blake became certain that he was the man in the picture, a killer who always uses a knife, the paper had said. Then she remembered something else from the newspaper story, something about a woman killed by this man in a train. Suddenly, she sat up. The man's hand was moving towards the pocket of the coat. Slowly, he put his hand into his pocket and took out a knife. Carefully, he opened the blade. A long blade pointed at the end. Mrs. Blake wanted to jump to her feet and scream for help, but she could not move. Fear held her. Only her eyes watched the open knife in the man's hand. Now his other hand began to move towards his pocket. He is looking for a handkerchief to put over my mouth so that no one will hear me, she thought, but instead he took out an apple and began to peel it slowly, putting the peel carefully into a paper bag, and that he also took out from his pocket. Mrs. Blake breathed more easily. Perhaps he wasn't the killer after all. But no, she looked again at his face. She was quite sure now that was the face in the newspaper picture. Then he did something which brought back all her fears. He finished peeling his apple, and instead of putting the knife back into his pocket, he put it down, still open, on the seat beside him. She lifted her magazine, for now he was watching her, his deep, dark eyes never moving. Now, thought Mrs. Blake, nearly dead with fear, now he is going to kill me. But the man opened the window, threw out the paper bag with the apple peel, closed the window and sat down again. Over the top of her magazine, she saw the man's right hand move towards the open knife on the seat beside him. At that moment, the train began to slow down. Mrs. Blake saw the houses and streets of Eastbourne moving past the window. Then the train stopped and the man stood up. Yes, she was right. He was the killer. For outside on the platform, waiting for him, were two policemen. As he got down from the train, both policemen saluted smartly. Good morning, Inspector, one of them said. The chief constable is waiting for you at the police station. Sir, we have a car outside. As they walked away down the platform, Mrs. Blake picked up the newspaper which was still on the seat. On the front page were two pictures, one of a small man with thin lips and another of a big dark man she now knew so well. Under the first were the words Jack the Killer, and under the other Inspector Thornton of Scotland Yard in charge of the case. Mrs. Blake smiled as she got into a taxi. John always says, I don't read the newspaper carefully enough, she thought. Dear students, this is the story. The language is very easy. You might have understood. Give a reading at home. You will understand it in a better way. Still, I would like to tell you the summary. The characters of this story are Mr. and Mrs. Blake. Mr. Blake has come to see off his wife, and he made her comfortable in the carriage, the train, a comfortable seat, and he has also offered whether she wanted something or not. So he had taken a ticket for her and a magazine, because she denied for the newspaper as she read it in the morning. And he left for his office. She met a person, a tall and dark person in the train, who came and sat in front of her. And when she saw him, she found, although she asked her husband also whether he knew him or not, but he told no. But she remembered that she had seen the picture of that man in the newspaper in the morning, and she found that in the newspaper it was written that he was a killer. He has killed a lady, a woman, with a knife. He always used to do the killing or the murder with a knife, and also put a handkerchief to stop them shouting. Now she was very frightened, and she was sure that the man was going to kill her. So she was thinking of pulling down the chain, but she was also a bit hesitating that if she'll pull down the chain, if the guard will ask her what she would say, because she was not very sure about that man. The man came and he hung his overcoat on the rack and kept his luggage also there on the rack. Although he did not talk to the lady, after some time he took out a knife from the pocket of his overcoat. Now Mrs. Blake was even more frightened, and then he started peeling off on an apple and keeping the peels on a piece of paper. But she was a bit relieved now. Then she kept on thinking about him, that this will happen, that will happen, the man will kill. A lot of things were going on inside her mind. But after some time, when the train stopped, and the man was reading a newspaper in between, and when he left the newspaper, she again saw the picture there. And when she became even sure, when two policemen were waiting for that man, tall dark man, she became even sure that the man is the criminal, because the police have come to take him. But then she found that the policemen were saluting him, and they were addressing him by inspector, and the people, and they were waiting for him. So now Mrs. Blake saw the newspaper again, which was left by inspector. Then she read it carefully, and she saw that two pictures were there in the newspaper. One was about a small man with thin lips, and it was written Jack the Killer below his name. And another one was a tall, dark man, the man who was sitting with her, and it was written Inspector Thornton of Scotland Yard, the in charge of the case, below his name. Now she laughed on herself that how wrong she was, and she boarded a taxi, and she remembered her husband's words that she never read the newspaper carefully. So she understood her mistake, and this is the end of this story. So sometimes, dear children, sometimes these things happen with us also. Sometimes we don't understand people, we don't observe, or we don't know them very properly, and we have a notion about them that they are bad or they are too good. So later on we regret, later on we come to know that how wrong we were. So this is called life. This kind of mistakes are done by everybody. So I found this story very interesting. I hope you also. So go through this kind of thriller stories. This will like grow interest in you, interest of reading, because reading brings concentration, It's a very good habit if you are reading books, novels. Thriller novels, are more interesting because we always want to know horror stories, thriller stories. We always want to know the end of these stories. So, in order to know the conclusion, we always read till end these stories. So, we should go through that. I'm sure that this will grow interest of reading in you. See, there are some questions here. Where was Mr. Blake going to? Why was Mrs. Blake going to? Why did Mr. Blake leave early? She was going to meet her cousin. It is written here to meet some cousins in Eastbourne. And then the next one is, why did Mr. Blake leave early? Because he had to go to his office. Why did Mrs. Blake prefer to read a magazine rather than a newspaper? We have read, because she had already read a newspaper in the morning at home. What did John always tell his wife? Did she heed his advice? No, she never, because she always read the newspaper in a hurry, and John used to say that she never reads the newspaper carefully, and that's why these things happen with her. She had taken the person in a wrong way. She has misunderstood the man who was sitting with her. Take the correct options. When Mrs. Blake looked at the man sitting on the seat facing her, what will be the answer? When Mrs. Blake looked at the man sitting on her seat facing her, she thought he looked funny. She remembered seeing him near her house. She remembered that she had seen his picture in the newspaper. I think the third one, C, is the answer. When the man in the train took out a knife and opened its blade, Mrs. Blake wanted to jump on her feet and shout for help. This is the answer. We have seen this line in the story. So for number 1, the answer will be C, and for number 2, the answer will be A. See number 3. When the train stopped and the man got down at the station, the answer will be 2 policemen saluted and greeted him. This is the last few lines we have seen. These are the answers. The answer with reference to context, answer the following questions. These all we will do in our next class. Here, answer the following questions. You have to write your own, because you have to show your own feelings about it. If you were in Mrs. Blake's position, what would you have done? What do you come to know about Mrs. Blake's character from the story? Give at least 3 traits. Like one is that she was very fearful. She does not read the things carefully. These kind of things. Whatever you feel after reading the story, you will write here. Okay. There are some exercises also which we will do in our next class. Although these exercises you can also do. Identify the types of adjectives. We have already done adjectives. Then these identify whether the highlighted words in the following sentences are adjective or adverbs. Slowly, ly word, adverb of manner. Slowly is adverb, slow is adjective. This all you know. And these are the words with blanks. Answers are already given on the right side. You have to choose and write from them there. These all things you can do yourself also. These are not that much very difficult exercises you should do. Then we have some other pronunciation traits are also there. Democracy, how we use the Italian words and all. Okay. Then you see after that, no, you have to take the help of the dictionary. The school and cold, crime and sin, salary and wages, rent and hire. These all things we'll do in our next class. Before that, you will do all these things yourselves. Okay. I hope you have understood today's story properly. A little bit homework I'll give to you. So shall we wind up today? Read this story once again so that you may get interest. We have learned from this chapter that two things prevent us from happiness, that is living in the past and observing others. With these beautiful words, I'm going to end my class today. Take care of yourself, students. Goodbye.